In science, honesty is always the best policy. Honesty will set you free. And that's a hard lesson to learn. Hopefully you learned it when you were young, as I did. This video will be about basically telling the truth and how it affects your science career, how you could go forward.
The GERA Foundation presents this series called Navigating Research.
As always, all my stories start with something very simple. When I was young, I learned a very good lesson, that if I lied, I got beat. If I didn't lie, I got beat less. And so I learned not to lie. So you get to the point where you just decide that the only thing that you have, that you really truly own, is your integrity, your ability to tell the truth, and for people to accept that you're telling the truth. And if you lie any one time, then basically a person can say, well, you know, you lied to me once, why aren't you lying to me a second time? That was my rooster. They make noises. Anyways, but the bottom line was, from that early beginnings, I began to realize that if I tell the truth, it's much easier to go through life. It's much easier. I don't have to make up stories. I don't have to remember the stories I told. And most importantly, when I was younger, I didn't get beat. My mom or my dad, if you lied to them, you said it was somebody else's fault, that or whatever, well, you just, it just didn't end well. Just didn't end well for you, and you had trouble sitting for a while. And that would, yeah, it was, yeah, don't do that. Don't do that. So it was a really good learning curve. And in your career, whether it's whatever you do, going through life and that, if you keep that at the heart of everything you do and what you talk about and who you talk to and what you say, the chances are you're going to apply it to how you do your research even. You know, like giving people credit for the work that they've done. Things like that. They're very important methods. So the most important thing I think I decided when I was quite young was stop lying. Just tell the truth. Always tell the truth. And don't get into situations where you have to lie. So things like that. So you begin to learn these little lessons along the way, and it helps you through your career. So don't lie. That's the key to this thing. Don't lie. Just don't lie. As it relates to writing papers themselves, the actual science and how you give credit, I'm very liberal. I have friends of mine, and I won't name names because I mean it's, you know, you don't want to do that. I just don't want to embarrass people because I think some people are a bit harsh. I have one friend in particular. He absolutely believes that you have to do equal proportion of the work to get a name. So if it's a 2-author paper, you must do 50% of the work. I don't subscribe to that theory at all. I find if somebody has done something interesting, I will give them credit. I mean, I've made a presentation on a source, G9.62, and a young high school student, he came in, was shadowing me. I put him to work. He was very good at processing. He learned very quickly how to process spectra, and he created some time series, and he said, hey, look at this. And he had found another feature, had turned on in the source, and is strongly periodic. And that was kind of cool, and that actually led to another discovery that we made in that paper, which was the velocity drifts. All because a high school student was given some work just to process, to get a feel for what astronomy is. So I gave that person credit. Joel got a publication in high school. And that looked pretty cool on his resume when he applies for university, and I'm sure he's already in university for that matter. But I mean, when I was a young, I was a second-year physics student, and I made graphs and whatnot for a paper that one of the professors at the University of Alberta was doing, and I did some analysis or whatever else, and he put my name on his papers, and that's where it started, really. So I found that if somebody gives me some suggestion or something like that, I tend to give them credit. You can acknowledge them, yes, but if it's a scientific suggestion that I think it warrants itself, I put it in the paper and I make them a co-author. In fact, I've only written one paper of, I haven't written that many. But of the first author papers that I have, only one is single author. And, well, if you count my PhD and my MSc, 3. Okay, but those you have to be single author anyway. But, so no, I tend to share I tend to share credit with people, even if they give minor advice and whatnot. And it's not because I'm trying to get them to put me on their papers. I don't care. It's the point is that we've had an interesting discussion. That discussion has led to something else. Like Joel finding that source led to us finding an even bigger, more interesting phenomena. And I think that source he discovered is going to lead to another more interesting phenomenon, because now I fixate on that source because it's done something interesting twice. It was the first source to be periodic. Now it's got systematic velocity drift. So what else might it have? So I look at these sources and I stare at them. Okay? And it just leads to, you just stare at these data for hours. So what Joel did, got himself a publication. In fact, I think he got two. But what Joel did, got himself a publication. And it's led to more science, more discovery. And so sometimes a person saying, hey, maybe that's snow, as you can see around me. But the upshot of the story is they make that, and you go, hey, yeah, that's a good point. I'll put that into my model. The temperature must be around zero, and blah, 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 blah. And you understand what I'm trying to get at here. So simple, and it might lead to an important discovery in your work. And I give credit for that. And I really think it's a good policy. And I don't ask people to do reciprocal credit. I'm not interested in that. If I've not done anything to the paper, why would my name be on it? I don't care about that sort of thing. Let me lastly say about that. I mean, I was involved with the VLBI program at Hartrail when I first arrived in 1991. And I would get my names on these papers with like 50 authors. And I was like, what did I do? All I did was change a tape. So, that's out. Okay, a little bit more than changing the tape. You know what I mean? Anyways, so simple advice is if they've given you some useful information, offer them co-authorship. Be kind, be good, and it'll lead to so much more research and so much more cool science you get to discover. So that's just my simple advice. You don't have to take it. Be a hard ass if you want. Get out there and shock the world with your great discoveries. But sometimes it's nice to share. As this relates to research, so you're trying to navigate the difficulties of doing actual research, and some of the parts where this will come into play is when you found something really exciting, really interesting, and you've realized that it's somebody else's data. What do you do with that? Do you just run with it yourself? Do you just say, well, I found it, so I'm gonna just do whatever? No. You contact the person straight away and you tell them, this is what I found in your data. I really think this is important. And I have an example of this, and I'm not going to give it because it's not published yet. But it was exactly that. You have to go back to them and say, this is what I found looking at your data, especially if it's publicly available. Really, I know they say after a year, somebody this and that, all that kind of business. But the simple reality is that if it's somebody else's data, why not share with them? Why not? Even if you have to reprocess all the data, do everything. Doesn't matter. Why not share? I know in science circles today we actually have time limits on our observing. So you do observing on the VLA, they say you got 1 year exclusivity. Thereafter it's made public, somebody else can download the data, process it, publish it on you. And I've had data like that published. Some of my data that I did in the late 90s when I was in Mexico. It was published by other people. They took the data, they published it. They did a nice job. They never contacted me and said X because they didn't have to. There's nothing wrong with that. I hold nothing against them. I really don't. And it was good science. I mean, I thought it was good science when I did it. I just never got around to publishing. I had left astronomy and I never got back to the data. And these guys saw, hey, this data is interesting. Let's use it. Good for them. Me personally, now looking back, I kind of think, especially some of these data sets like I do, when I do long-term monitoring, I mean, I've been looking at a source for 30-odd years, since the 1991, basically, 1992 effectively. And you develop a sort of a certain attachment to it. Almost like my supervisor absolutely loves Cephas. Vic Hughes loved Cephei. And he would always talk about Cephei. And it was almost like he owned it. I mean, there's objects in Cephei named after him. The Hughes Valtelaut sources, HW sources. He's the H. And me, I could care less about that. All I cared about was doing really cool science. So the first thing I would say to you is, as it relates to long-term monitoring, that's a different story. I've been doing that processing for so many years. Really, you should give the credibility to where it belongs. And in monitoring programs, such as the work being done around the world now with the Maser monitoring program even, you want to give credit to the observatories because that's how they get funding. So if you think you're being a smartass, taking their work, publishing it under your name, all you're doing is hurting the observatory that you got the data from. And you won't get future data because they won't exist. We have to help each other. That's the way this thing has to work. So, as it relates to long-term data, I would say contact her. As it relates to archive data, it's a different story. The policy set by the observatory. The observer knows the policy. Have at her text. And good luck to them. Okay? But in longer-term monitoring programs, unless they've been made publicly available, that even then I would contact the persons who made it publicly available. And I would recommend it. That's just my humble opinion. You can do otherwise, but the more difficult you are, the more people treat you difficultly. Just so you know.
I want the truth! You can't handle the truth!
Honesty and integrity, I think they go hand in hand, and it makes your research career so much better. So when you start out, the most important thing you can do is be forthright, be honest. Have a sense of decency regarding things, and don't try to hoard it. In the end, it's just science. Does it really matter if I found something up there? Does it affect the people beside me? Do they starve to death if I don't discover it? Does it really matter? My point about the whole thing is, the more open and the more we have this sort of, what's the word, in Africa they call it Ubuntu. It was a Southern African philosophy of spirit of community, sharing, helping one another. It's a pretty nice way of thinking of the world. It's that spirit of community, effectively. And in astronomy, we really have to have that. When things are really crazy out there in the world, and there's competing political headwinds going on, all the stuff is going mad, the one thing that should stay constant is science doesn't care. Science doesn't care. Science is science. And especially astronomy, because we're not inventing the wheel. We're just not. Okay? But we are doing really cool things that help people understand who we are, what we are. And if you start by being honest, having integrity, being forthright to everybody else, sharing resources with people, that means discovery, papers, and so on, you create a much stronger community. And I think that'll lead us to making even greater discoveries. And I hope that carries on. Look at that face. Only a face a mother could love. No, not even. No, let that go. Let that go. I'm about to launch into ranting about politics and science, and I'm going to cut the video right there. Really, it is, science is science. We do really cool things, and if we keep true to our integrity, honesty, and try to keep things factual and don't make things up, we're always going to do okay. And I think that's the important thing, and I think that's all that really matters. But yeah, if you want to hear the political aspects of astronomy, well, that's another video, and I'll try to keep that one for later. But for the young members of the audience who may or may not listen to this, well, I'm going to leave that out. You go and have a good time, and try to be factual when you do your work. Try to give people credit for the work that they've done in your work, and just basically, be honest to everybody.
Always look on the bright side of life.
The GERA Foundation will produce more videos like this. Please like, share, or subscribe if you enjoyed this video.